us. I know we're in a time of lots of Zoom meetings, and we are very touched that you are spending some time with us at East Bay Community Law Center, and that you're spending time with us during your lunch hour. Well, if you're on the West Coast, how many folks? Other folks said Amy calling from the East Coast. Is anybody else, or we just have one East Coaster? It's okay, the only one. Oh wait, we have Emily's on. It seems like you're at a different time zone as well. And I know my sister Lauren is on Mountain Time, so I just want to thank you for joining us, and folks who are coming from all over. So my name is Zoe Polk. I'm the Executive Director of the East Bay Community Law Center. It is my pleasure to serve with this organization. I've been in this position since January, and quite a 9 months it's been. And I am really looking forward to this critical conversation by our 4 stellar board members, Saxon, Tiffany, Monique, and Vanessa. And we actually started planning this event in June. And folks who remember, and I know so many things have happened over this year that are big events. But if folks can just think back to June, what was happening in this country was, of course, the murders of Brianna Taylor and George Floyd, and the political uprisings and awakenings that were happening all across the country, in which people were saying that not enough, this has been another one and it's too much. And then also, alongside that, there was just a newer energy in which we saw people, particularly in the corporate sector, issuing statements, talking about Juneteenth, closing down offices for Juneteenth, providing pro bono support in dollars, and looking internally and navigating, thinking about where they can make changes internally to adjust racism, structural and internal racism. And this was June. June was, just under 4 months ago, and now and so much has changed since then, and since we conceived this conversation. Most recently, there was an executive order banning racial sensitivity training, which has had lots of ripple effects in the diversity inclusion spaces, and certainly places and corporations across the country and organizations across the country kind of grappling with what does that mean for the work and the progress that we've made, not since June, but for many of us, including our board members, for the work that they have been doing in their organizations for years. So what does that mean for the corporate sector? And how can we as lawyers living in these truly historic times get this right and make sure that we're doing justice to what the moment requires, as well as doing our obligations in our roles at our organizations. So I'm really excited to hear from Vanessa and Saxon, Tiffany, and Monique about this. They have lots to say. And before I hand it off to our fabulous moderator, Saxon, I did just want to make this announcement that, EBCLC is fundraising for our back to school and critical education program. And Cobra Kim Law Firm has issued a challenge grant, a matching gift grant. So if for the next 24 hours, for any donations up to $5,000, those donations can be doubled. And I will put a link in the chat. And so if you donate, your donation can be doubled over the next 24 hours. So I put that here, and I encourage you to consider donating to EBCLC. And with that, I'd just like to introduce Saxon Cropper Sykes, who is our moderator. He is also an incoming associate at Sidley Austin LLP. And I have to say, a recent Berkeley Law grad and a survivor as of yesterday of the 2020 bar exam. That has been, let's all give praise to Saxon for that. And just really, I'm so grateful to you, Saxon, for moderating this panel so quickly after the bar exam. Saxon, again, as a graduate of Berkeley Law, he received a certificate in social justice and public interest law, as well as pro bono honors from Berkeley Law. And we are so grateful to him for moderating this conversation. He brings a very unique lens as someone who's fresh out of law school and get ready to enter into this sector, and just really appreciative to you, Saxon, for framing this conversation. So thank you, Saxon.
Thank you, Zoe, for the introduction. I would now like to introduce our other amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Monique. Monique Weibert is trademark counsel at Google. Google LLC is an American multinational corporation that specializes in internet-related services and products. That includes online advertising technologies, a search engine, and cloud computing software. Monique was a student in the health and welfare practice. Our next panelist is Tiffany Thomas. Tiffany Thomas is Employment Law and Benefits Senior Counsel at Genentech. Genentech is an American biotech company, and Tiffany was a student in the health and welfare practice as well. And last but not least, Vanessa Henlin is Senior Counsel in the Real Estate Development group at Gap. And Gap is an American worldwide clothing and accessory retailer. And Vanessa was in the housing clinic. So I want to begin this panel, and I'm going to start with Tiffany. All of you all were Berkeley Law and EBCLC alum. Can you all share, go ahead and talk about it. I've introduced your practice, the clinic that you ran, but kind of go back to that and kind of tell me the skills that you learned while at clinic that were really instrumental to your career. So we're going to go with Tiffany.
Sure. So I decided to do the EBCLC clinic because my bestie Christy told me to. Oops, I'm getting a notice that my internet is unstable. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. I may go, I may come. It is what it is. It's 2020. So we both joined what was then the welfare clinic. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned is how to treat people is not a legal skill. It's just kind of a social skill. And especially how to treat people of color. I remember when I would meet with clients, and back we were in the old building, and you would come around this corner and I would have a client and they say, oh, we're bringing out Tiffany Thomas. And then I turn around, come around the corner and they see me. And then they sometimes look around like, where's Tiffany Thomas, right? But then when, especially a person of color realizes that I'm the one who's representing them, just kind of that light kind of pops up. Like you see a bit of pride, you see trust, and you see, someone being encouraged because they're coming to EBCLC because they have a problem. So that really taught me to meet people where they are, to treat everyone from the people in the mail room to the people in legal to the people in the C-suite the absolute same. And it just kind of, on top of my parents' teachings growing up, it just showed me how to be more compassionate, that when people are looking to you for legal services or their first interaction in a legal process, even in my capacity in-house today, most people aren't used to being involved in these legal practices. So I have a skill where I can recognize that look of fear, that look of apprehension, and kind of allay people's concerns so that I can get the best outcomes for my clients, whether they are pro bono or it's someone internally.
Monique, you were in the health and welfare. Can you kind of tell me what skills were instrumental to your career?
Sure. So I did the health unit, I think the spring of my 2L year, back when Sheila Hall was running the health unit before she left EBCLC in the last 2 years. It was a really great experience for me. I spent a lot of days just kind of trying to get up to speed on various client files. Like a lot of the health cases stretched over, several semesters. So you might be picking up where another student had left off, sort of just kind of figuring out where the cases were in their life cycle and, what steps that we might be able to take to help to be able to advance the case. So when I was thinking about this question and just like some of the skills that I had learned, definitely like patience, sifting through huge amounts of information and the sort of gems that might make a real difference. Just the ability to just be a zealous advocate, understanding like just how to listen to clients and get a sense for what problems they're facing, and taking a holistic approach, because a lot of the clients that we had, like their legal problems were just one small part of many other problems that they were experiencing in life. And so it was really important to be able to like contextualize the problems that they were having and what small part of their overall problems we were trying to help address. I developed an ability to kind of get a sense of like what the things I was able to help with and the things I wasn't able to help with, like sort of drawing boundaries. And I think that just all of these things were skills that were helpful to me as I went on in my career. I was always interested in like the counseling and advising motif of counsel, like being a lawyer. I was never super interested in like the contentious litigation aspect of things. And so I gravitated towards an IP practice because a lot of the things that a trademark lawyer does are more like counseling and advising, early stage businesses, helping them address problems. Let's say they've gotten a C&D letter from somebody else. So I feel like the skills that I developed at EBCLC were directly transferable to the things that I do today. And basically I was at a firm for 3 years and I've been in-house the last 9 or 10 years. And I think that, everything that I learned at EBCLC has been directly transferable. And, just generally valuing and uplifting community lawyering skills. That's something that EBCLC also taught me. And so since my time at EBCLC, I've always done, pro bono work or served in various volunteer capacities in legal and legal adjacent nonprofits like EBCLC. So yeah, just wonderful things to say about the experience.
Vanessa, we were both in the housing clinic. Can you talk to me about some of the skills that you learned that were instrumental to your career?
Definitely. So in the housing clinic, what we did was represent low-income people who were our clients who were on the verge of being evicted, and generally for non-payment of rent. So it was our goal to be able to help them keep housing that was habitable, and sort of the primary focus that we would have would be to make sure that we could, find a defense for them not paying rent. A lot of time it was because of the inhabitability of the place where they were living. And if we couldn't do that, keep them housed in their existing place, what we would try to do is get enough time for them to stay where they were so that they can look for a new place. And an important part of that also was to try to reduce the amount of back rent obligations that they might have. Because of course, they were in the situation that they were with the eviction because they weren't able to pay their rent. So in terms of the legal skills that I learned, and I think this is true for, whether it's the welfare clinic or any other area of EBCLC, I learned basic sort of fundamental legal skills like time management. We had classwork that we had to do, but we also had to represent our clients. So it was important that we were able to balance that time and spend enough time on, reviewing the documents and responding to the documents, and paying attention to detail. Obviously is another skill. We would, we had sort of form responses that we would have, but it was still important to be able to read the file and understand the particular position of our client. And it, really important not to get complacent when you, fill in files. And deadlines obviously are extremely important. And it's one thing to, sort of blow off a deadline in terms of, reviewing a case in class, but obviously it's another thing to not have deadlines correct when you're representing someone and you're helping them to make life-changing decisions. Active listening, I think Tiffany mentioned that. Legal analysis obviously is extremely important. And developing strong communication skills. I think that's been mentioned before, being able to communicate to the client in a way that the client can understand sort of what the actual situation is and what the options are, but also being able to listen and to understand what the outcome is that the client would like, and to be able to figure out how that works within the law, and to try to be creative as well. And using good judgment in terms of having limited resources and trying to understand what you could do. Limited resources in terms of my time, clients' time, our supervisors, their time, because they had a number of us clamoring, asking them questions because we were all new at this type of thing. It's the same that happens right at law firms with associates and partners, and everyone has to, we've got billable hours, and you can't just sort of meander around and not focus on how important it is to be, concise and gather all your thoughts together before asking questions. So all of those skills translated really well to what I do now, which is commercial real estate. I've been practicing commercial real estate for the last 25 years. And I've I started off in medium-sized law firm, went to a larger law firm, then worked for the city attorney's office. After that, went back to a law firm, was there as a partner for 10 years. And I've been at Gap now for almost 3 years. So this is my first in-house gig. So I think wherever anyone who's worked in these clinics ends up, the information that you've been able to, or the skills that you've been able to develop, and the characteristics, the character that I think Tiffany mentioned, sort of being able to develop empathy is so important. And empathy translates, even, you know, the transactional work that I do, we're dealing with money, we're not dealing with life or death situations, but we still have to negotiate with the other side. We still have to figure out, you know, what do our clients have in common, and how do we get to the end point, you know, and try to be civil at the same time. So I think, you know, I look back on the experience that I've had, and it's definitely helped me in terms of where I am now, in addition to obviously, you know, other areas.
I totally agree, especially in regards to the attention to detail aspect, because in the housing clinic, so much can be won in the unlawful detainers, figuring out, you know, was the complaint properly served. So Monique, I'm going to come to you now. And we're in a time where we're witnessing, you know, a lot of people in the corporate sector and beyond are asking what they can do to support racial justice. And back in June, we saw that there were many corporations, Nike, Square, Twitter, these companies issued public statements on Juneteenth. I just want to know, can you share what that experience is like for you working in the corporate sector at that time? What were your thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess as a person of color, you know, I didn't just all of a sudden realize that these broad scale racial inequity issues existed. So at first it did kind of feel like there was some skepticism and just sort of like, you know, this isn't new. Like, why are you just now paying attention to this? It did feel somewhat bandwagonish. But, you know, as more and more companies sort of fell in line and we started to see some real actual like concrete commitments and changes, that, I mean, you know, it was obviously like very loud in May and June, as Zoe was saying, when we started talking about this panel. I think seeing more of it then, like I became more optimistic. I do think that things may have quieted down a little bit. Some of that, you know, probably due to the election that we're going through and the pandemics that we're currently in. But I do think that there's still like very concrete things that were committed to by some of these companies that are still continuing to happen. Some of the campaigns I was like super impressed with, that like just stood out to me because of the things that they did and the actions that they decided to take. I think like Lyft had a really strong statement and went on to sort of like commit their actual services to making changes in the community. Like they committed to, you know, offering ride services to like NAACP members or battered women, and like things that I thought were real actual like rubber meets the road type changes. Ben and Jerry's also had like a very strong statement where, you know, they really called out just, you know, all of the inequities and, you know, the need to be like anti-racist and, you know, actually make specific changes within some of these broader corporate organizations. I can't take credit for it, but there was a deck that had circulated by a marketer at Google that she shared with our Black Resource Group that was basically like a centralized collection of a lot of these different corporate responses that we saw, you know, just around the time of George Floyd and the National Call for Racial Justice. And in that deck, they highlighted a few themes, sort of like things that worked well for campaigns and things that were sort of like pitfalls that like were things that companies should have looked out for. So some of the things that they highlighted were investing in action, you know, ritualizing commitments within your organization, outlining internal policies or new internal policies, sort of taking a pause and reevaluating the role that your company plays within this broader ecosystem. To the extent there are products or tools that your company was offering, like looking at how you could fix and retool them to help be part of the solution. Some of the pitfalls that were flagged were, you know, the companies that sought sort of like participation trophies. Like there were some where you really felt like the only reason that they made a statement was because they didn't want to be the only one left out of the conversation. And those statements felt like they read that way, just very flat, like we have something to say so you don't boycott us, but not actually committing to any change or taking any responsibility on. There was a homogenous wallpaper, which is kind of like not saying anything, just like we're all in this together kind of speak, just empty and vague platitudes, statements that had a lack of self-awareness, and then ones that like just lacked any sort of roadmap for change. And so I thought those were good sort of ways to think about the different buckets of statements that we saw. One thing that I found a little bit frustrating was that many of these large companies like immediately flocked to give money to like the same 3 social justice organizations, like, national organizations that we're all very aware of. But, in that week where they were all announcing these pledges, at the point where, I'm tallying numbers in my head, like one organization has already received $3 million. It was a little bit frustrating just because there's so many, more local organizations that do work in the communities that like actually have plans to provide direct services, like an EBCLC, for example, like where I felt like the money that was generated out of all this excitement could have been circulated a little bit more broadly. And so I would have loved to have seen more support of community-based organizations, just organizations that by virtue of existing are basically doing racial justice work. And so, with EBCLC, whether it's keeping people housed or keeping them in this country, helping their employment prospects by making sure that their criminal records are something that is people will hire, advocating for juvenile justice in our schools. Like I think organizations like EBCLC are really on the front lines of this racial justice work. And so I wish that there had been a little bit more thought given around how this money was spread around that time. But ultimately, like I think I was like optimistic to see this new energy around racial justice and, a lot of companies sponsoring like trainings and book clubs and, encouraging people to get more educated on the issue and figure out, what are the ways that each of us individually can contribute and make a difference. Like, I found it energizing.
Vanessa, what was your experience like back in June when everything was kind of going on?
Well, a lot of it mirrors what Monique just said. So I'll focus on the fact that, what drew me to GAP originally was its focus on values. Its focus on equality. It was started by a husband and wife, and there have been more than, I think, 50% of women working on all levels of the company for quite a while. The focus on environmental sustainability and the focus on really developing the employees in different ways. And so, and that was different for me from my experiences at the firm. So I came to a company that I thought and that I do feel good about working for. And then, then all of this hit. So I actually never, and maybe I think I was jaded from having, worked for a really long time in firms, et cetera, that I really never looked to my workplace to provide me with sort of the type of feeling about, oh yeah, they really support, equality in a way that I could get behind. I really hadn't looked for that. And at GAP, it was just pleasantly surprising that it was sort of there without me asking for it. And so I'm just sort of laying the groundwork. So when all of this happened and lots of companies started, putting out commitments, et cetera, that, Monique has listed a number of them. There are companies that focused on different things. So companies like Ben & Jerry's focused on more of a sort of a national push for equality and picked up on not just ideals, but picked up on movements that had already been happening for a long time. Getting the supporting the passage of HR 40, to study reparations, they focused on a lot of issues that were already on the national scene and not sort of how can my company look good because we've said that we've you know, provided money to certain people, or we're just making this statement that Black Lives Matter. And then you have companies that, you know, quickly cut checks to different organizations, as Monique said. And then you had companies, you know, and there were companies that did combinations of those two. Then there were companies that looked more internally to say, okay, what, how are we benefiting our customers, and how are we benefiting our employees, and what can we do to make things better in that way? So, you know, and I think sort of GAP falls into not necessarily, you know, the national outlook, but more so trying to look inwards. But it was one of the companies that pretty quickly came out with commitments, and the commitments varied. One of them was to double the number of Black and Brown employees in headquarters by 2025. Another one was to increase the number of Black participants in a sort of a pipeline program, internship program that GAP has. Another one was to allow people up to 3 hours of PTO, pay time off to vote on election day, or if they wanted to work at the polls, then they could get paid for doing that as well. There were lots of commitments that were made, and these are things that are going to take time. And GAP admitted that, look, we have a long way to go, but you know, we're committed to doing this type of thing. And I think a number of companies have done that. And really, the proof is in the, you know, I'm waiting to see. I'm still jaded, right? But I'm waiting to see sort of what, because things have quieted down, I think, just generally nationally. You know, when eyes aren't focused as much on companies, sometimes companies tend to say, okay, I've checked the box and let's move on to something different. So I think I'm taking a wait and see mode position. I mean, one of the things that that I do appreciate is, you know, GAP actually providing these different sessions, these diversity, equality, and inclusion sessions to allow people to educate themselves some more, and just to get more information so that we're generally speaking the same language and we have the same vocabulary, and that people get a better understanding of, you know, what a whole swath of people are going through and have been going through in their daily lives. There's a woman named Amber Cabral. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, and she's been just amazing, and she's been holding sessions for us. And there's another woman named Michelle Silverthorne, and you know, I hadn't heard of them before, but they spoke to everyone. They spoke to everyone, and they have provided sort of a list of other resources that we could go to, whether they're podcasts or movies or books that we could read. And this is we meaning everyone, meaning me, meaning the Black employees, Brown employees, because we were educated under the same systems as everyone else. You know, we've been miseducated and undereducated in the same ways about what the contributions have been, you know, of others to the U.S. So I appreciated that outlook. And I think at this point, as I said, I'm still in a wait and see mode, but I think, you know, money is good. Money is good, whether it goes to a few organizations or more. It is much better if it's spread and more focused to organizations that we know are currently working towards, you know, social justice and equality. So, you know, we need to see.
Tiffany, what did you think was effective? What are the responses that you saw were effective? What was your take on what happened back in June?
Well, my take is a little bit different because I actually work in the D&I space. I am the advisor to our Chief Diversity Office, which was established at Genentech in January, and it kind of brought all of the diversity work that was going on all over the organization under one roof, under the leadership of our Chief Diversity Officer. And so as the advisor to our CDO, June was a mess for me. While all these companies were coming out with statements and, people were blacking out their corporate social media pages and the like, I was kind of like in the trenches on what is Genentech's response going to be. While, like Monique said, some folks woke up like, oh my God, racism is a problem. Fortunately for me, I picked a company that was already in this fight. And when we talk about social justice, we're not just talking about, legal rights, not killing unarmed Black people, housing. We're talking about kind of a spectrum of the things that can make equality something within reach for communities of color. And at Genentech, we focus on medicines. That's what we do. We're one of the first, I think we are the first biotech company. But in that position, we said, okay, we look at our studies and 90% of the people in our clinical studies are of European descent, which means that Black and brown people are being left out of these conversations. So while all this was going on, not because it was going on, but because we were already doing it, we stepped up in that area. Specifically with respect to COVID, we went directly to Black and brown communities to try to recruit Native Americans, Black folks, Latinx folks to participate in these trials, because when we do these trials and we come up with medicines, they're not for us, right? They don't know our uniqueness as ethnic individuals, right? And so we went to New York, we went to New Orleans, we went to Detroit, we went to DC, we went to different countries in Africa. And so now that everybody is on this social justice train, it gave us the opportunity to amplify what we're doing. And now pharma is now having a pledge to advance inclusive research, which is a program that Genentech actually started to make sure that we're pipelining diverse people into our research and that we're getting our medicines to the most people. Along that line, we did a health equity study where we said, okay, we're trying to advance inclusive research, but we know everybody knows about Henrietta Lacks. Everybody knows about the Tuskegee experiment. Everybody knows about the foundations. Well, not everybody. We know about the foundations of modern OBGYN practice, right? We people of color, especially Black people, we don't trust the medicines and the research and trials and things of that nature. So we did a study so we can meet people where they are. But outside of, having a wonderful statement that our CEO made, wonderful because in my role I review those things, and we can in a way to make sure that it's saying exactly what we're supposed to say. We also launched our Kindergarten to Careers STEM pipeline program. We put out a call for proposals for health equity partnerships to go into the communities and impact the lives of Black and brown people through healthcare. In fact, EBCLC submitted a bid. We didn't get it. We're going to get it next time, Zoe. We've done things like implementing inclusive hiring practices where we actually train people on how you hire people and how you interview people who are diverse and have people sitting in those meetings. And when you are holding one candidate who happens to be brown up to higher standards than you did to someone else, you get called out on those things, right? And so I think the great part of my position is I'm not really paying attention to what everyone else is doing, but I'm actually on the ground advising on what our company should be doing, what we can do, how we push the envelope, and then how we kind of lead the way. And it's a great place to be, especially when you're like me and when someone gets shot, that impacts me. After George Floyd, I had a hard time getting out of bed, but there was work to be done. And it was work that will impact the George Floyds of the world. So I think June was interesting, but it wasn't a beginning for us. It was just a continuation of the work that we were already doing. And we're hoping to inspire other pharma companies to do the same.
So Vanessa, you talked about this, but oftentimes people think that there are really only two ways that lawyers and law firms can contribute to social justice work. We see it through either pro bono hours or financial support. But today, each of you shared other ways that individuals and companies can make meaningful contributions to change our legal system for the better. And so Monique, I want to start with you. How have you navigated this within your career, and what advice do you have for people who are trying to basically implement change within their organizations?
Yeah, sure. So I could say, you know, within whatever, every organization that you're in, you know, is going to have different challenges, you know, different folks who are allies who may already be predisposed to helping you reach some goal, or people that you have to win over. I personally, like in my role as a trademark attorney at Google, like, you know, I'm not working in labor and employment or philanthropy or maybe like HR even, where like parts of the company that you might naturally think are, you know, focused on issues of equity and, you know, racial diversity, like as part of their core jobs. Ways that I've found to be able to contribute is like looking for like opportunities to be involved with diversity efforts of the department. So like I've served on our internal diversity and inclusion council for several years. You know, being a representative of the company, like to the extent we are going to engage in external affinity bar associations or conferences and things of that nature, like making sure that I'm part of those delegations and representing the company well at those places, and making sure that internally that we're getting budget to support these very important initiatives. But just like things that I think people can do just kind of in whatever organization they're in that are helpful. I think it's really important to build out your internal network, just to make sure that you know sort of who to go to for what within your organization, right? So like, who is the person that cuts checks for sponsorship or, you know, funding some initiative that you might be passionate about? Who is the policy person that might evaluate whether your company is willing to take a statement on a particular issue? You know, what is the process for sort of getting a request before those folks? You know, how is your company's like performance and evaluation process put together, and who are the people who are involved with that? Like, just having a sense for yourself, like who the different players are, can help once you decide, you know, what way it is that you want to try to influence your organization. Just having an idea like where to even start. So for me, like, you know, whether it's money, policy support, hiring support, you know, vendor diversity, whatever it is, like I am now in a position where I kind of know who to go to have the conversations, to at least flag the issues for them to consider. Like, even if me in my role, I'm not able to, you know, make the change. Also, it's important to build out a network in the community outside of your organization, so that you can understand how best your organization can support these external, you know, whether it's nonprofits or affinity bar associations or, you know, folks focused on pipeline. People have to know who you are and you have to know who they are to sort of make these connections. And so I've found being active, you know, just outside of my role, my day-to-day 9 to 5, like I am a member of various organizations or sitting on different boards, so that I can try to look out for opportunities for places that Google could be more involved and engaged. I think like doing sort of a self-assessment and thinking about the strengths that you have, like, and what types of things you might be able to contribute uniquely. If you are a person of color, sort of thinking about who are the people who are not people of color, who you might be able to consider allies and work with to get certain goals achieved. If you are not a person of color, sort of thinking about, are there ways for you to shoulder some of the burdens of people who are doing a lot of this diversity work stuff in your organization? Like, are there ways that you contribute and be part of those conversations to help maybe ease the burden with those people? I think often people of color, like to the extent, you know, I spend a lot of my extracurricular time outside of my 9 to 5 job doing diversity work, like it makes my bandwidth stretch really thin, and we get tired, and the work can be exhausting. And so like the more people that we have doing the work, the less of a burden it is on all of those people trying to get to the goal. Let's see. I've had like, just for myself, like had to recently sort of focus on like self-care in a way and learning to say no to things, because people often, like in their interest of, seeing that you're somebody who engaged or somebody who's interested, like, want to nominate you to do various things or lead this committee or do this and this and this. And I had to sit and think about, just what are all the different commitments that I have, and, which are the ones that are most important to me, and how to like sort of prioritize those. And just learn to say no to things like, there is somebody else who can probably lead your finance committee for this organization that has nothing to do with advancing goals of, diversity and equity and inclusion, which I think is, a very important thing that I want to spend more of my time doing. And so like I can focus my time on, this other bucket of work by saying no to some of these other less mission-driven opportunities that might present themselves. But just like areas, I think, to think about within your organization, trying to advance and change, your promotion and retention policy, making sure that diversity work is part of the performance review process, considering whether there's some way for you to be a mentor to somebody else who's junior in the legal profession, or just in general, like a person of color who's junior who might be trying to advance themselves. Getting involved with board service in community justice-based organizations also. Sorry, I think I'm kind of all over the place here, but if you have other specific questions about certain aspects of it, happy to answer them.
I think that's great. I'm actually going to transition over to Vanessa. Vanessa, you had mentioned some of this, but what advice do you have for people, maybe junior people, for identifying their power to implement change within their organization?
I think that a lot of times we think we have to take these huge steps to really make an impact, to make a positive impact. And I think we start small. We start wherever we are. So it can be, you've heard, if you see something or hear something, say something, right? If you see something that's not right, or hear something that isn't right, then speak up. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking to the person who's creating this negative situation, then speak up to someone else who may be able to support you in that way. So that's one area. Another way is sort of, I feel as though it's important for me to support my team who I lead at work, but also to support people of color, whether they're in my organization or outside of my organization. Sort of an example for me is that when I came to Gap, my manager at that time was a white male. And he created the type of environment for me where I felt as though I could really thrive. And I think this was the second place that I've worked where I felt that I didn't really have to prove my worth constantly, right? Regardless of how long I'd been at the company. And that's huge. That's huge. I think it's huge to just anyone, period, but it's really huge to a person of color. And, and so I try to create environments where I make people understand that, I have a vote of confidence in them, and sort of build them up and support them rather than start off, and make them feel as though they should be doubted. That goes a long way. And so to me that's a small thing, but it has a huge impact. Also for me, in my role, I'm a hiring manager. If we need to hire people in our real estate law team, I've hired 2 people already, and they happen to be people of color. But because I was in the role of hiring manager, I was able to actually expand the pool of candidates that that normally, you know, would have come to us. And I think, you know, sometimes it just takes sort of sitting back a little bit, thinking about the networks we may have. If we don't have the process already within our companies that will reach out to some of these various organizations, it's informing them of that, and then us doing our own legwork as well. And so, you know, and the people who I've hired, I mean, incredible women. One has since left and she's now on, and the other one is still on my team and has recently promoted her. So I think we need to look around and see, you know, what is it that we can actually control now? I mean, I could look at the company and you know, look at different areas that can be improved. But I can, you know, I start with sort of what's my smaller sphere and then move out from there. And that's what I've tried to do. In addition to that, you know, I just try to make myself available. I try to make myself available to, again, people inside the company or outside the company. And it could be something, you know, sort of as small to me as reviewing someone's resume and critiquing it and expressing to them how someone in a company would look at how they've, you know, stated certain things or question things and have them make certain changes so that they don't have to get their resume rejected by someone who just doesn't have the time to do that. You know, I also have made myself available to, you know, give career advice or, you know, advice to people who are in law school or elsewhere, or to even, you know, a lot of people just, you know, need referrals to certain whether it's different attorneys or organizations, and just, you know, I try to make myself available for that as well. And that's, I think, within everyone can do that. And I've also, as you know, Monique had mentioned, I've also, you know, been on different boards and, you know, participated in different organizations. Not everyone has the time to do that, you know, so, you know, focus on one if that's what you have the time to do. And if you don't have the time to do that, then again, there are just other areas where I think you can help sort of push forward social justice. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, going through what we're all going through, you know, since June and even before that, I think, you know, there's a role that we can take where we sort of stand back and look at the company or the firm and say, we should be, you know, companies should be doing more of A, B, or C. But then I think what makes more sense is for us to determine, well, you know, how can we make our situation, you know, you can think selfishly, how can I make my situation better, or how can I make the situation for others who are like me better? I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who's in a different department at Gap, and we were, you know, just lamenting and just talking about a lot of different things. And she decided to take action. And so she created this pipeline plan for her group. She wrote it up, gave it to the vice president in her group and said, this is what I think we should do to get more people of color to learn about what we do and to be able to fill these job positions that we have, rather than it coming through, you know, whatever ways they generally come through. And so she spoke with the vice president. She had a vice president who was willing to listen and was open, and then circulated that plan around to others. And they're now implementing that plan. So she went from, you know, she didn't go to the vice president and say, you know, this is what I want you to do. She actually just made it easier, right? It was more work for her. And I think that's one thing that it just, you know, I was telling her that, you know, why are you taking on that burden? But when she talked to me too, she said, yeah, burden. But she said, I also feel as though it's a responsibility. And I've really, you know, you know, you go up and down in terms of how you think about different actions that you take or want to take or are willing to take. And I think that's the way that we really have to look at things. You know, how willing are we to make the changes that we're saying we want to see, right? And if we're not really willing to do that, then how do we expect others to do that who aren't even experiencing things in the same way that we are? So just in general, just to sort of wrap up, I think everything that I've talked about is just, it's a matter of taking time to sort of self-assess and figure out what it is we're willing to do, but also understand that we're part of a bigger community and that it's important that whatever skills we have, we should be willing to share them. And I keep thinking about this quote, right? Each one pull one. And I never really knew the origin of that. And I looked it up, and apparently, you know, Alice Walker wrote a poem, which is pretty amazing. Basically, it just talks about how, you know, we shouldn't be complicit in allowing people to define our history in a way that's not true, our history, our culture, our contributions, and instead do is help bring each other, and you know, each other, you know, meaning it could be people, you know, if you're Black, people who are Black, Mexican people who are Mexican, etc., but also others. Bring each other to the light. So use whatever information and knowledge we have to help bring each other along to where we expect to go.
Now, before I go to Tiffany, I just have two announcements. First, we're going to be doing a short question and answer. So if you all have questions, please save those questions. And then second, I would just like to remind everyone, Cobra and Kim's is doing a matching program for the next 24 hours. If you donate to our campaign, the donations will be matched. So Tiffany, to close things up, what advice would you share about, you know, how individuals can really implement change in their organization?
I think the biggest way to implement change is just to be willing to keep your eyes and ears open and willing to speak up and say something. And so there's several, I think there are a few concrete ways that you can do this. For example, when you think about a class action, right? When you have a class action settlement, oftentimes there are side prey awards. These are awards that go to community-based organizations as part of the larger settlement, right? We're attorneys. When you hear about these cases, when you hear about your law firms, especially if you're in-house, when your law firms are talking about cases that they're dealing in, oh, well, if you have a side prey award, I know who you can give that to. You know, keep organizations like EBCLC that work with social justice front of mind for those issues, because everybody's going to give to, as people have said before, everybody gives to NAACP. Black Lives Matter, Minnesota, they got it. You know, think about ways that you can get your pet projects and organizations that are dear to your heart into those conversations, because often people of color serving organizations aren't part of those conversations. The other thing I would say is amplify your voice. I'm very active on social media. Not everybody can see everything that I say, but on LinkedIn, the more professional part of Tiffany, don't try to look me up because you're not gonna be able to find me, because Tiffany Thomas, there's a million of us, good luck. But on LinkedIn, I post things like this particular event. When we have calls for proposals for grants, I post those things. When I see things that other people are posting, I share them, because this is my professional networking socially, especially now that we're at home. So people already know who I am when I walk in the door. They know what I'm about. And so people who want to get more involved in social justice work, people who want to get more involved in racial justice work, know that I'm your girl, and I may have ways for you to get involved, even if you're not a D&I officer, even if you're not in HR, or you're not supporting D&I efforts at your company. The other thing I would say is, if you have the capacity, now and speaking to people of color, we have to give ourselves a little grace right now. That's a lot, right? Everybody just had this awakening, and we're just like, where have you been all my life, right? We've had these issues this entire time. And so everybody's not built for this work. But if you want to work on changing a system from the inside, being in D&I at this moment it's a great place to be. It's frustrating. It keeps you up all night. You work hard. You run into people who are not on the same team. But when you get something accomplished, like that feels like oh, my audio is going in and out. See? So I said the most magical things. You guys couldn't even hear me. Well, it was all great. So I'll just
We heard you, Tiffany.
Okay. All right. So, but the thing is, if you can get into this work, it's a way to contribute to social and racial justice issues while also fulfilling that need that I think EBCLC instilled in me in always having my hand involved in something relating to helping other people. Like no matter if I'm a partner at Reed Smith, you know, in-house attorney at Visa, no matter where I go, that's where my heart is, and that always has to be part of what I do. And so I love this work. Not speaking to anyone in particular on the phone who may be thinking about D&I, whose last name might be Polk, but it is a great area to make a real difference. The other thing that I would say is pay attention to what your organizations are doing. If you are in-house, 9 times out of 10, there's a corporate foundation. And since I left the law firm a few years ago, I've looked for mission-based organizations. It's just who I am. I need you to be about something. And so at Visa, we focus on financial inclusion. At Genentech, we focus on advancing inclusive research. Look for ways where those missions and foundations can, merge, goals with organizations that you support. Like I said, the proposal that EBCLC put together, working on that proposal, we can send that out to 15 different places if we just know those opportunities. And then also make introductions to the extent you have the opportunity to come across somebody who works with your foundation or works with the charitable giving arm of your organization. Let them know about the organizations that you care about. Introduce your company to groups that everyone doesn't know, but groups that are doing really good work on the ground. And then I already talked to people of color, so non-people of color on the phone. Know that people of color in your workplace, we're tired. I know you heard this, and initially we appreciated every phone call starting with, I can't imagine what you're going through, or tell me how I can help. And that was sincere, but now we're tired. And the conversations that these companies have had, they've been great. Everyone's gotten their feelings out, but now it's time to go to work. And so if you're looking for a way to kind of get into this conversation, make sure that you are being a voice in your company. Like the one Black person in your organization doesn't have to do diversity recruiting, diversity interviewing, doing all the committees, going out and being the face of the company, right? We can't do this alone, and it's proven. And now that companies are really paying attention, all of us need to hold our companies accountable for these pledges, hold their companies accountable to the promises that they've made to us as employees. And I think that's something that we can all do, especially when, my anxiety is out of control in COVID. So I went to one protest, almost had a panic attack. Not gonna do it again, right? That's not my ministry. But working in, doing the work that I do, connecting people, and just being open is to organizations, mentoring, talking to people about this D&I space, talking to people about social justice. That's what I can handle. And so the last thing I would say is only do what you're prepared to do, right? Because we really need folks in this space who are really dedicated, and not to dedicate your whole career to it, who are serious about their commitments and serious about furthering these causes that everybody is now talking about.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I just want to leave a little bit of time for our Q&A really quickly. I know we're getting to our deadline. If there are any questions from the audience, please unmute yourself. Our panelists would love to. We probably have time for about 1 or 2 before I pass it back to Zoe, if there are any.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe's twin. I really appreciate everything that all of you ladies have had to say. It's definitely been like Tiffany, what you just said is exhausting. It's hard to, carry that load as the only Black face in the organization. And I get completely frustrated by the roadblocks that they keep putting in front of me when I try to ask them to just do the smallest thing. So I'm at the point now where I think maybe I really want to stay. My company's manufacturing and industrial. I'd like to stay and really make change for the Black employees that are there, because I am the only in the executive level. But I also think for me personally, maybe my efforts are better served elsewhere at another company that would appreciate it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, if I should stay in the fight or.
So I'll take that one. I would just say that do what's best for you. There's no, like, if you are the, GC of a company that's, okay, I was gonna be stereotypical. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna use another example. If you're a GC or a senior attorney in a company where there's just no movement and you've tried, that's not what they're gonna do, right? So your efforts and trying to push it would be futile, right? And it would just make you feel more uncomfortable. And to the extent you stay at a company like that, there's other things that you can do. You can be a sponsor for your Black employees group. You can be a mentor to your Black employees. You can recruit more, I don't know if you want to, but you could recruit more Black folks, so that you have a critical mass. But also, to the extent you make a next move, I say you use this experience to say, this is not what I want in a company. I'm going to see those companies who blacked out their social media, but then they also backed up what they were talking about, right, and then go to one of those companies. And for me, going from a law firm that was all D&I all day to get in-house and get to where I want to be, I had to take a couple of side steps. And you may have to do that, but as long as you're doing the things that are fulfilling to you in that space, I think that you can make it work, and then look for the right opportunity when it presents itself.
Thank you.
I would just add,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Continue.
Oh, no worries. I was going to say, just as an example, I'm not sure it exactly applies to your situation, Lauren, if you really feel like there won't be any movement, but I had recently tried to get Google active on a particular political issue, and what I was talking about earlier about figuring out who the contact is for this or that, it took me probably 3 or 4 different people plussing folks into an email before I finally got to the person who was responsible for considering the request I was making. And she heard me out, and now I know who she is, and I was able to sort of forward her on the materials that I had that sort of made her evaluation of the request, a little bit more comprehensive. It didn't end up working out, they didn't do anything in this case, but I now have that contact, and so for the future, I'm trying not to be too discouraged about the fact that it didn't happen here, and we'll try again the next time. But yeah, it sounds like in your situation, the needle may not be moving, but just sometimes it, you may just need to keep pushing the rock, and eventually maybe it'll budge. But there's another.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more time for one more quick question.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sephra. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I just started working in diversity and inclusion at Bumble. And one of the things that has come up in conversations recently, which I'm sure has come up for many of you, is how companies should be, I guess, proactive in responding to the outcomes of the election. And I wanted to know if any of you have thought about this in terms of what are the expectations in terms of what do we do for employees? If they're how should we be framing what we want the outcome to be if there is an outcome we want given our values, but also be supportive of all employees and our brand. Have you thought about this and taking a political stance and telling voters to vote one way? And what does that look like in your organizations?
I can take a stab at that. So I think preparing for the election is very important. We actually have a task force going right now, kind of figuring out what we're going to do and make sure that our employees are taken care of. And so from the legal perspective, telling employees what to do, specifically politically, is a no-no, right? So we can't do any of that. And none of your companies would do any of that. But in the same token, we have questions of what if someone comes in with a MAGA hat? What if someone comes in and, has a never are there never Joes? I don't know, some type of weird political issue. So there's a thing about the law is protective of political speech, right? And so we have lines that we can't cross with respect to employees, but I think each organization needs to get the word out to the employees that we have a code of conduct. And while you may have your different views and everything like that, you need to be respectful of each other. You need to follow the rules. With respect to companies, I think it really depends on your company. Bumble, why do women have to go after the man? That is so silly. Anyway, so on Bumble, you know, it's a smaller company, right? You may not have government contracts. A company like Genentech, you know, we are one of the biggest supplier of flu shots to the federal government, right? We can't come out and say, you know, this executive order is trash. Not, you know, we can't say anything like that. But if you're in a smaller company, you can think about how politically active, and it doesn't have to be a political race. It could be Prop 16, you know, affirmative action. It could be something that's local and important to employees at your company. But I think you have to figure out where your company is in its growth and its strategy, and know that, you know, some entities that deal with companies are vindictive, right? If they don't like what you say, that can have severe consequences for your company that can range from the loss of contracts to us. It could be the slowdown of emergency use approvals for some of our medications to treat things like COVID. There are other things that you have to think about instead of just being like, you know, my company should take a stance, because there are actually financial things that are at stake.
Well, I think that that is a good way to conclude our question and answer. I'm going to turn it back over to Zoe.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa and Tiffany and Monique. I am Saxon for being such a great moderator. I'm just really deeply grateful for your being open and talking about what it's like for you to be in these roles as you're navigating really tough issues. I know Tiffany told me, you know, when we were prepping for this last week, that the sky fell on her when that executive order came down. And I know for other folks on this call, it might be similar. And I can't help but name that's, you know, for a lot of people who have been dealing with COVID, been dealing with wildfires, been dealing with the impact of and trauma of police violence, and then also dealing with the global economic recession. These are, we're, you know, trying to match all this stuff up and doing it while we are living, you know, leading jobs and roles that may match up with our values and may very much have jobs that are outside of those crises is a challenge. And I just appreciate all of you for just talking us through what that's like for you, and then also providing some openings for, you know, what it's like to continue to be yourself and to continue to wrestle with these real-time issues and in your job, whether you're in a DE&I space or not. So I want to thank everybody again for attending this panel. It was recorded. I did hear from someone saying that they would like to share this with their colleagues. We will send out the recording for this after we close down. And then again, I want to invite you. We are fundraising for our back to school campaign for fundraising for EBCLC. It's a great way to put some of the advice that Tiffany and Monique and Vanessa gave in the panel to use and donate to EBCLC. And we'll also include the link for that in the email as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you also to my sister for joining us as well. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Zoe. Bye.
Bye, thanks.